many different kind of places, but it's an interesting one. But thank you. Okay, so it is still about citizenship. Once you're in this kind of framework of things, you always end up thinking different. Of course, you use different data, different kind of comparative kind of perspectives. You go beyond a certain region or the whole world, in my case, usually, but today it's on the regions. And my starting point is that since the 1990s, global cultural shifts driven by neoliberal turn have ushered significant changes in citizenship, in the institution of citizenship. And this has given rise to an increasingly agentic conception of the individual, but with also very strong meritocratic ideological underpinnings. And this is not to say that meritocracy just started in the 1990s, but the meritocratic talk became very densely integrated with ideas of or policies of citizenship as well. And you do see this shift manifested across a wide range of policy or institutional domains. And the normative foundations and the institutional embodiment of agentic citizenship has been studied. I've done this myself, but many others as well. But we really know much less about the enactment of this citizenship by individuals. So it's the empirical grounding of this citizenship at the individual level. So, and this is what I will do in this talk. I will present comparative empirical evidence on agentic and meritocratic citizenship or orientation and their relationship with solidaristic inclinations among higher education students, and my comparative perspective brings China and Europe together. I will tell you later why that is the case. So, fundamental to the concept of citizenship is agency, the agency of the individual, and this is represented in the principle of individual self-determination. There's collective part of it as well, but individual self-determination has been always very important from the very beginning to the idea of citizenship. In the immediate post-war shaping of the liberal world order, citizens' agency was firmly embedded within collective structures, right? Family or family groups, national economy, national welfare, national community. The global neoliberal turn, let's put it that way, and here I don't really mean market fundamentalism as such, or neoliberal economic globalization as such. I really mean a broader kind of cultural imperatives that came with this turn. And we see the decoupling of individual agency from the national constellations. Okay? And with that, citizenship came to project a big version of the individual, empowered with rights and capabilities, and has the virtue and also the consciousness of participating at local, national, and transnational scales. So a number of qualities are associated with the agent individual: achievement-oriented, independent, belief in self-capabilities, belief in control over success and life course. And such view of the individual is culturally charged and in many ways naturalized by ideologies of merit. That's the liberal creed that social and economic rewards should reflect individual talent and effort for sure, but not ascriptive characteristics, right? And that's this idea of agency of the individual is very closely linked with that idea and the idea of, again, individual effort and talent. So the agentic and meritocratic citizenship is often associated with American individualism. I mean, with all of this that I just described as agentic meritocratic, it really reminds of us of this American individualism. But since the 1990s, and particularly cutting through the ideals of knowledge society, this model diffused globally. And it's part of transnational agendas. It's promoted by various international organizations such as UNESCO, OECD, but also World Bank, and linked with human capital and human rights ideas. It's endorsed widely in educational spheres. It's in school curricula and pedagogies, for example, very much part of the school curricula and pedagogies. It's also adopted in government policies, as in the case of, for example, social investment policies that rely on individual accountability, but also, you would be very familiar with it, point-based immigration schemes, for example. These are schemes that are devised to select capable, talented, and productive individuals with agency in that sense. So there's another aspect of this, and there are people who study, I don't myself, but the proliferation of digital technologies in private and public sectors. This is, these are the kind of technologies that enable measuring the performance and merit of the agentic individual. And this brings this kind of citizenship model very much to the daily life of the citizen. Marianne Fourcade, for example, wrote about this, and it's one of the, I think, most sensible kind of commentary that I read in terms of this shift to how this kind of digital citizenship comes alive in individuals' lives and how that creates all kind of issues, of course. So as a model and policy practice, this is what I'm trying to say. Agentic citizenship has widespread currency, both in national and transnational spheres. Okay, so, but there's ample scholarly commentary on the promises and failures of agentic citizenship. People don't call it agentic citizenship, and also meritocracy, but this is the broader kind of, I want to call it agentic citizenship, and it will come clear, I think, at the end. That most generally, for example, it's been argued that meritocratic talk in policy, or giving this kind of primacy to the individual in policy and public discourses, legitimizes inequalities. And in the sense that attributing success to hard work, for example, or individual agency makes inequality more acceptable. There are studies of this, and restrains redistributive preferences. And clearly this has corrosive implications for collective solidarity. And more specifically, Bourdieu inspired sociologists assert that the agentic meritocratic ideals propel individuals in a race of performance and demonstration of worth, creating new moral boundaries. And thus, this inevitably leads to stress, for example, anxiety and mental challenges, particularly among young people. So there's this argument as well. Michel Lohmann, for example, makes this argument, and in terms of the solidarity and redistributive preferences. And there's Sandel, of course, he wrote much more broad kind of piece on that, but people like Mies also has been doing empirical analyses of this. So all of these critiques are compelling, clearly. However, when you read the empirical research, you find that this is still in development, this kind of empirical aspect of these points that are made. And you find that existing research is not always in agreement in terms of their findings. And much of the work that's done, empirical work, is really in the Western part of the world, right? So I start from the perspective that the widespread circulation of these ideas, the cultural and institutional narratives of agency, meritocracy in national and transnational contexts really invites us to look at this and their implications comparatively. So as a background, again, I've done studies, empirical and other kind of studies as well on educational aspect of this, for example, including East Asian countries, Europe, how much these ideas are incorporated in school curricula, textbooks, and we found that quite extensively, including international organizations of various sorts. So if that is the case, it would be really imperative to look into comparatively to what extent these ideas are prevalent across the world. Yeah. And that's what, again, I would like to do in this talk. So we asked two questions. First, the question of to what degree are, again, agentic and meritocratic ideals commonly present in individual repertoires of self, to what extent we see ourselves within this kind of framework. Second, what are the implications of agentic meritocratic orientations for global and national solidarity, and also subjective well-being? Okay, so to address these questions, we drew data from Bright Futures survey. It's a unique representative survey we conducted among higher education students in China, Germany, and the UK. We have Japan as well, but I'm going to leave that aside for this talk. The data were collected in 2018, before COVID. And in our sample countries, we use exactly the same questionnaires, translated from English to German and Mandarin Chinese and Japanese. And the sample size is about 10,000, but today I will be showing what we have in this analysis. And the survey was implemented through a structured sampling approach, and this was based on the university size and ranking in all the countries. In China, it was additionally stratified by provinces, because we do know that there are geographic inequalities in access to education in China. And students in each university were then randomly selected to participate in the survey. Of course, we couldn't do this without our collaborators in China. It would have been impossible, but the funding came through both the German, UK, and Chinese National Science Foundations. It was a collective call, and so we collaborated with the University of Tsinghua, and they were the ones who then contacted all the other universities in the sample and helped us to do that. It was quite an arduous process. If anyone is interested in asking how to do surveys or should you do it, yeah, we can talk about that later. But I think the important thing is that this survey data, this data set is highly pertinent. And the reason is this: why higher education, right? Higher education. It's a primary site, if you think of higher education, particularly university, for the construction of self-conscious liberal society, world society. We think of the world very broadly in universities, right? I mean, there are excellent studies of this as well. What university really means. David Frank and John Mayer wrote about this, how university became from this kind of nation building, serving the nation building as an institution, to really globally connecting and acting But in that sense, really, there is this idea of self-conscious liberal world society, construction of that and its citizens. And universities also play a key role in the diffusion of these kind of templates or understandings, models of agentic capable and globally oriented individuals in that sense. But importantly, higher education is increasingly massified, right? I mean, higher education, which used to be a very elite kind of institution, of course, it has changed. Like I'm not at all claiming that it's completely became a mass education, but it has really massified, and the current proportion of the age cohort enrolled in tertiary education globally is more than a third, right? So that's a very important way of thinking about what university has become. So in that sense, I also argue that university student is a standardized category, increasingly, not as elite as it used to be. So if you want to know, I mean, that's the starting point, why to focus on higher education is that if we want to know the reach, but also limits of the agentic individual, higher education is a good place to look at, right? But secondly, and it's important that our survey enables a double comparative strategy. So our case countries, UK and Germany in Europe and China in East Asia, these span liberal and non-liberal kind of contexts, political spectrum on the one hand. And then it also links with this very much emphasized, although I have issues with that, this individualistic versus collectivist kind of cultural spectrum, but that helps us to address that as well. But furthermore, and this was also important for us, that this sample simultaneously includes international mobile and immobile students body in the case of Chinese students. And that was important for us because we wanted to know that if what we are talking about is this kind of cosmopolitan, mobile cosmopolitans versus those who really are rooted or state, this sedentary nationals kind of question. So that's the other reason why this was important for us to look at, that what we are seeing or talking about is just a reflection of the mobile cosmopolitans and all that. And there's one reason why China is also extremely important. So China has experienced a very significant middle class expansion and rapid increase in tertiary education since the 1990s. And globally, it's the single largest source country for international students. So, but of course, there's one other reason that China politically shapes itself as a self-declared alternative to the liberal order. And if this agentic meritocratic understanding is a product of the liberal world order, so it would be a good way of seeing a good contrast to these kind of much studied liberal Western context in that sense. Okay, all of this was background. So I'm going to show you now our findings. And I'm going to start with the distributions of various components of agentic meritocratic citizenship across student groups, okay, our analytical groups. So in Bright Futures questionnaire, we had different sets of questions that allowed us to examine three linked dimensions that are embedded in the cultural and institutional narratives of agentic citizenship. The first one is this, what we call as agentic individuality, again, self-identification as creative, independent, risk-taker, and achievement-oriented. Secondly, second dimension is self-efficacy. So one's belief in their capabilities shape the situations and contexts that that affect their lives. And third is the belief, one's belief in meritocracy. That's again attributing success to one's hard work and talent. So for all the three dimensions, we use factor analysis. That's the individual components in each survey question into synthetic indexes, and that's the distribution of these synthetic indexes are what I will show. So our underlying argument is that to the extent that university is a catalyst in the diffusion of this agentic and meritocratic citizenship, we should expect these dimensions to be highly standardized across countries and across universities, not only across countries, but also across universities, because as we know, universities are never equal. They're very highly ranked, very highly connected kind of universities, as opposed to, but because we did random sampling of universities, we had all kind of different universities in our sample. So we want to know whether there is a standardized self-repertoire across different national higher education systems and universities. So here is the distribution for each dimension, right? Agentic individual self-efficacy and meritocracy. Europeans are the third panel, third one in the if you look at the Chinese in China, Chinese in Europe, and Europeans. So for all the three indexes, these are quite similar distributions, okay? So about 75 to 80% of respondents in each group identify themselves as agentic. Similarly, 75 to 85% of respondents in each group think of themselves as capable of shaping their situations and experiences. But I think for us, the most maybe striking, although then we looked at other data sources as well, almost 90 to 95% of students in our sample think that hard work is extremely important, getting ahead in life. So university students across the countries, and actually whether they are staying in China or going abroad for international study, they do think that meritocracy in the sense, I mean, they do think that hard work really brings success. So these were only descriptive, but of course we did also edit the controls in multivariate analyses, and as we can see here, although there are some students group differences exist, and some of them are actually significant, but they are very small in size. And most differences actually result in as insignificant. And again, important thing is that we control for parental education and occupation and enrollment in highly ranked universities. So once you do these controls, the standardization argument holds, still holds. Okay, let me now turn to the relationship between agentic meritocratic orientations and solidarity. Will Kimlicka, one of Canada's own, good friend, but also extremely important commentator on these issues, he distinguishes two dimensions of solidarity based on two different notions of justice. Universal humanitarianism, this is associated with global consciousness. It's not necessarily solidarity, abound solidarity, but really this kind of embeddedness within a global consciousness and humanitarianism, and bounded solidarity, which is associated with national consciousness and membership. Will Kimlicka privileges the latter. For him, this thick understanding of solidarity is important. But we do know that, again, from our previous work, as scripted by international organizations of various sorts, and also as taught in schools, agentic citizenship proposes individuals to be active and contributing local, national, and global levels. So the agentic citizenship really assumes this idea that individuals should have both global and national solidarity. So, okay, so let's move to global orientations and universalistic solidarity. For this, in our survey, we devised a question where we asked survey participants to make donations to various social projects located in different countries. Again, and the question asked was, imagine you have 100,000 yuan, Chinese yuan, and this is about 14,000 USD, to donate to development projects. How would you allocate this among the following in different places? So respondents were given the option of deciding in percentages how much they give for each option. And this options were, they specified a project in specific location in Congo, Paraguay, Laos, and China. And again, the overall sum could not exceed 100%, so they were supposed to really donate or allocate within 100% of this money that they had, what percentage goes which location. Important thing is that the location listed their real places and their where there are actual social projects, right? I mean, we looked for these and we picked providing clean drinking water, building a primary school, facilitating sustainable farming, and building health infrastructures, the most important of the projects that really link with really poor areas. And we randomized the answers. The projects were randomly assigned to the locations in the question, so that we wanted to. So every respondent saw a different combination of the projects and the locations, because we wanted to neutralize the effect of the social cause itself. I don't know, maybe you really are concerned about health. So if you see the health only, you might, independent of the countries, you might go for that project. So for that reason, we randomized the answers. And our main concern was to see which location the respondents choose to donate, right? Not the projects, but which location. So if the respondents were tuned with universalistic global solidarity, we expected them to allocate their donation money equally across locations, more or less equally, 25% for each location, given that all these locations are in dire need of social intervention. And if you have universalistic kind of solidarities, the country location should not matter for you. You should care for each individual independent, right? So that was the idea. Okay, so, and this is what we find. On average, European students, and that's the third bar in each panel, they divide more or less equally, 25% more or less, and some marginal differences, a bit more than 25% in Congo, a bit less than 25% in China. Chinese students, on the other hand, and this is what you should look at, they predominantly donate to projects in China, and that's independent of whether they are in China or they are in Europe. So 45 to 50% of their budget goes to China. And for the others, much less compared to China, between 15 to 20%. So clearly, Chinese students have solidarities to a very large extent nation, right? I mean, they do donate. Not all the money goes to China, but compared to Europeans, it's much less than most other countries. So if you have not yet noticed, I will say the biggest caveat here. So in our location and project selection, we were very much constrained by the projects addressing the most dire needs, right, in the world's poorest regions. So we couldn't put projects in Britain or Germany. So in that sense, this is not necessarily tell us whether European students, what is European students' national commitments in that sense, because it is really without that. We couldn't come around that. I mean, we thought about this a lot, but there was nothing. If you can come up with something, we are doing another survey, maybe we can introduce that. But so if that is the case, we just wanted to further examine the national attachments of Europeans as well as Chinese. So with a much more direct kind of question. But we again found very significant differences. And here the question that we used is how much respondents were proud of their nation's achievements in different fields: history, democracy, economic, scientific, and technological development, and countries' political influence in the world, as well as the contribution to international aid. So from ranging from not all proud to extremely proud. And again, we used factor analysis and we collapsed individual questions into a synthetic index, the national pride. Again, Chinese, Europeans, very big difference in terms of their pride. Yeah. We can again discuss whether this is the measure that we want and all that, but yeah, that's beyond the question at the moment. I mean, the most important thing is that we see very clear kind of difference in terms of our measure of the national pride. That's, yeah. And again, we did the necessary controls, and we did the regression analysis with different controls, and yeah, this is exactly the case. That's what happens. So what about then national or bonded solidarity? If there are these kind of differences in terms of the more global consciousness, what do we see at the national level or in regards to bonded solidarity? So global awareness, and I want to stress this again, and solidarity are essential for broader social justice ideals. So I wouldn't want to really downplay them. I think they are very important. But in this literature, and the main concern, I think, for many of our colleagues who are interested in or concerned about agentic citizenship is that it really affects one's commitment to welfare state, for example, welfare redistribution. And that is very much linked with bonded membership or bonded social membership. So much of the criticism of agentic and meritocratic citizenship really focus on that aspect. So we here engage with two widely argued positions, that meritocratic orientations or beliefs, and here we measure it as attributing success to hard work, make inequality more acceptable and restrain redistributive preferences, and also that meritocratic beliefs also foster competitiveness and overwork and feelings of failure and consequently mental distress. We use two measures for this. Solidarity is a very commonly used kind of question. Government should reduce income differences. To what extent do you agree? And for well-being, we used a standardized scale of psychological distress. Again, here's our results. So first, mental distress. Again, blue represents Chinese in China, orange Chinese in Europe, and green Europeans. So our results did not agree with the suggestions of agentic individual or meritocracy, let me say. We did the other one as well, but we were particularly looking at meritocratic beliefs. And no, meritocratic beliefs in this case, in our sample, they are associated with lower levels of mental distress, Chinese, for both Chinese and also the other European groups. Regarding redistributive preferences, we find a different kind of picture. For European students, green ones, indeed the attribution of success to hard work is linked with lower support for social redistribution. But the opposite is the case for Chinese. For Chinese, believing in hard work does not necessarily make them less supportive of social redistribution. So the argument in the literature, that's extremely big kind of emphasis on this point. Indeed, in the case of European, that's what we find, right? And there's another argument that's been coming up, which I also like very much. The new sociology of luck by Michael Sutter is talking about this, is writing, and it very much convinces me that, yes, we should look at how much people also believe in their success is about their luck, at least. I mean, you might also want to believe that it's to do with systemic failures. I would like that even more. But if you don't believe in that, at least believe that it might to do with luck, no? Or your social connections or something, but not just you, yourself. I mean, that's the hard part, right? So we decided we're gonna test this. I mean, if you haven't read this, it's an ASR article by Michael Saunders, and it's really excellent paper. Yeah, why we should take luck into consideration in sociology. Why should we develop a sociology? Excellent paper. So we thought that yes, if one really believe that yes, there is a factor of luck, maybe then they will see that there are inequalities linked with that, and they will support the policies, preferential policies, or more redistributive policies. And that's exactly what we found. For Chinese and in China and Europe, but also now for Europeans. If you believe in luck really matters, you become more supportive of redistributive and preferential policies. So a very broad kind of going through these results as a way of concluding, let me make some remarks. So our starting point was that in the prevailing neoliberal cultural order, agentic citizenship holds a substantial legitimacy. And I mentioned knowledge societies, but I think that that's a very big part of this. But that's another also talk. And but think about that this neoliberal cultural order really legitimizes and endorses this model of agentic citizenship. And what we did is we offer evidence on this regarding its enactments by individuals. So, and our work, I mean, our research goes beyond the Western context. And when you go beyond Western context, this is on China, yeah, but we observe remarkably standardized agentic and meritocratic self-perceptions among higher education students. And again, between liberal, non-liberal comparison, or all this culturally collectivism kind of arguments, no, Chinese students are very much committed as self, which is agentic and individualist in that, and not individualist, but agentic in that sense, agentic individual. But clearly, again, you should know further research is essential to know that this is not only China, right? Is there something specific about China? And there might be, China is trying to make a case for itself, for the global world order. Their educational kind of university effects are much more important. But this is, for me, it's an important kind of question that should be studied broadly. And one can do this to a certain extent by using the existing surveys, World Social Value Survey, for example. We looked at them over time, and but it doesn't, of course, give you this kind of detail that you can make a conclusive discussion. But we did see that younger people are more agentic across all countries, across time this happens. And in the case of China, university has an even bigger kind of effect, even among young people, right? I mean, independent of the university, there is this kind of difference, but even with university, there is some difference between the young China and Europe in that sense. Okay. Second, as a highly globalized institution, the university is a catalyst in the diffusion of this model of citizenship that I'm talking about. So our study points to a robust empirical regularity of agentic and meritocratic orientations, again, controlling for parental backgrounds, and not only across higher education systems, but also across different liberal universities, which really suggests that the effect of university as an institution, rather than independent of national law, but rather than effect of university as an organization and its resources, independent of its resources. Being a university as an institution makes this kind of, again, but it's important to note that by design, our study focuses on higher education students, again, an already selected group of individuals, independent of how massified the universities, of course. So further comparative research really is needed, involving comparisons of broader segments of the general population. And I think also various organizational settings, because we do think that university as an institution is playing a role. But it's possible, for example, one can look at among globally oriented professions, and compare that with national professions, whether there's a difference or not, in order to validate the role of higher education in the division of this model. Thirdly, international mobility may not play as transformative a role in individual self-constructions as commonly argued in the literature. Again, particularly among the higher educated, right? I mean, there's again, very big literature that makes this big distinction about big argument about the transformative role of individuals, transnational international mobility. But we did not identify significant difference between those who moved and who stayed in terms of this particular orientations that we looked at, or in terms of even national attachments or global attachments. People, it doesn't matter whether Chinese students go abroad or stay. And the important, of course, point here is that, again, the argument is that those who go abroad are a selected group of individuals. Not everyone can go abroad. But despite that, we didn't see difference in their orientations. And I think this is an interesting, not only so it's a strong finding, that's what I think. Okay, yeah, we have to think more about what does it mean, the transformative aspect of international mobility. Fourthly, and finishing, our findings suggest significant contextual differences, and that we really need to further unpack the relationship between this model of citizenship and global and national attachments, and also in terms of their impact on solidaristic commitments. Again, there's a huge literature, quite a bit of excitement about this, but it's important to see beyond the Western context And again, we found different patterns among European and Chinese students. Among European students, adopting this kind of agentic stance aligns with global outlook. I mean, they're not very nationally connected in that sense. On the other hand, among Chinese students, it appears almost axiomatic that that they position themselves as agentic and meritocratic individuals while maintaining a strong national attachment. I mean, they don't see any kind of contradiction between the two. So, and one interesting observation as well, and we noted this as we were playing around with the data. So Chinese students not only believe in hard work as the most important factor for success, but they also believe luck. They also believe in social networks. Those are the two. We didn't ask about systemic failure, I think. They also very highly, they go very high up in terms of their understanding. So, one can believe in many, many different things, but among European students, it was only 30 to 40% who believe in social networks and luck matter for their success. That's a huge, huge difference, right? And then, one has to go back to the whole historical, contextual kind of understanding of these two contexts, but I think it's an interesting way of thinking about. One last thing about this posited detrimental impact of meritocratic beliefs on individuals' subjective well-being. This doesn't manifest in our sample. I mean, but again, you have to do this in many, many different kind of contexts before you arrive in some kind of conclusive argument. But I mean, clearly, I have no claim on this whatsoever, because if you want to understand the stress and all that, you have to have many other kind of data points and all that. So I don't want to make that, but it remains a plausible hypothesis. I think that this agentic and self-assured kind of self-perceptions, as we observed in our sample, might offset the anticipated adverse effect, right? If you believe in that, you really can do, maybe it doesn't affect you that much that you put all your hard work and all that. But that I don't know whether that's the case, but it might be a mitigating effect.
I was wondering if you could say more about what you think the role of Chinese communist ideology is in informing a lot of these attitudes, because if we look at a lot of the public statements of Xi, he is really putting across a vision of society that is very heavily emphasizes hard work, meritocracy, and hard work as being a reason not to expand the welfare state. But also, under normal communist ideology, there should be lower differences in income. So it sort of makes sense that all these attitudes would go together in China, given the ideological context. So I was wondering how that is played into some of your analysis.
Sure. Excellent point. And I think that this is exactly what maybe it's about, that when I gave talks about this before, people who have China specialization, they said, but look, meritocracy is not new in the context of China. It has historical origins and all that, so people are really, but then again, it's not only hard work, it turns out. Really, Chinese do understand that there are social networks that play. I mean, they understand this much more so than Europeans. And it's true in the context of China, there's the whole concept of guanxi. So, I mean, social networks is also very much part of, so they do understand that. But why isn't that in Europe? I don't know. I mean, social networks don't exist? Don't people have, I mean, that's something that I always thought, I mean, this is in the US for sure, as if your social networks, as if they never exist or they don't. But I think social networks are one of the most important things, of course, in the context of the, let's say, even US academia. Again, the commitment to social equality, that it's, but then, we go beyond that, of course, and we want to see, was it that also Chinese students really adopt this kind of independent, autonomous, self-capable kind of individual characteristics that are very much promoted through education. And I can say a bit more about this kind of, an individual with ideas about that you are autonomous, you have rights and all. And we studied Chinese textbooks as well and educational curricula, as much as there is emphasis on, national, collective, there is a very strong kind of, this educational ideologies really, really penetrate. And they did. I mean, that I can easily say because I've done across country studies of this. And there's a very strong kind of this educational ideologies of individual autonomous rightful, that penetrates.
I have a Fred on the stack, yes.
First, thank you very much for that presentation. I found the presentation very interesting. I have one or two questions, and maybe I misunderstood some part of the presentation. I'm sorry. The first question is, well, basically, what are the limitations of the study, given the fact that it is entirely focused on university students instead of a study where university students will be compared with other young people? And especially, I'm not fully convinced about the role of the university in the dissemination of the meritocratic or neoliberal ideas, because it seems to me that maybe there are some truth to that thesis, but at the same time, university is also a location where young people are exposed to a lot of diversity, and maybe more aware of the impacts of social inequalities. So, yeah, what are the limitation and the impact of that design, which is not comparative between student and non-student people?
Yeah, I mean, in the ideal world of surveys, this is what we would love to do, of course, but there's no way. But there was really a very clear idea when we were designing this, that let's look at among higher education students, because the expectation is that they should, if anyone, they should be the ones. Because there is a very clear kind of understanding that universities are actors in making individuals in a certain way. I mean, this I claim, and I think I showed that in a way, right? But you're right. Empirically, to make it even more robust, I have to show that this doesn't exist among general population. This is not the case, partly because actually it also starts very early. But towards then, I said it, but I was saying it in passing. So we looked at the World Social Values Survey, and we saw that among younger people who are not necessarily in higher education. I mean, we looked at younger people, older people, right? That younger people are, compared to older people, much more meritocratic and have individual agentic kind of qualities. But we also looked at whether among the young people, being having higher education, being involved in higher education, as opposed to not, or having higher education degree, makes a difference. It makes a difference in China, not as much in Europe. And partly, I think, because these kind of models are much more commonly available, in European context than China. It's not the perfect, but that's all I can offer at the moment with whatever kind of surveys that we have access to.
Alison would like to comment.
Okay. So thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. It makes me think about all sorts of different things. But I wanted to ask you a bit more about the relationship of these agentic sort of self-conceptions and stress or mental well-being. It strikes me that among university students, like that should be a pretty hopeful time in life.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure what other, if there's other questions in the surveys that you could look at. Because I imagine if we think we're responsible for our fates and then things go really badly, that those might be the ones particularly susceptible to anxiety and stress about the situation. Whereas if you just think, you know, things happen and I have no control over it, then when bad things happen, it might not impact you as much or in the same way. And so I'm wondering if you could even moderate it on like GPA or something in there that you could get at people who are not succeeding.
Very good. And we did a bit of that. So what we did is we looked at those in very highly ranked universities as opposed to those who didn't make it to those. You know, that's of course, I mean, but you have to ask people because you have to know whether they were really disappointed, whether maybe they didn't. I don't know. Yeah, we don't know that. So that's quite limited, but at least we did that much. We looked at the difference between lower ranked universities and then also between GPAs, lower GPA as opposed to higher GPA, and whether that made a difference or not. It didn't.
Moderate
It
the
didn't.
relationship.
No,
Interest.
that didn't. But you're so right. I mean, that's why I really don't want to make any big claim about the same thing. And but I find it very interesting. But with these kind of controls, that there wasn't. Yeah, wasn't that.
Thank you.
I don't know your name, but you're next.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Again, the empirical data, they are so rich and really so revealing to us about all the refreshing findings about this topic. My comments are two questions maybe. The first one is also about the university, like the second findings or concluding remarks. I wonder if you could maybe say a little bit more about this diffusion of the agentic meritocratic citizenship model. Because I wonder if that diffusion assumes like a center and a peripheral relationship. And also, for example, we know like in China, there is this long tradition of meritocracy. And how would we factor that in when we consider this very interesting, complex attitudes that Chinese young people have about meritocracy and redistributive justice, for example. So this is my first one. And my second one is about this very interesting finding of the self-contradictory attitudes that Chinese young people have toward meritocracy and say luck, social network, and as well as the last one, redistribution. Yes. So the feature of one thing I realized that is the feature of self-contradiction is not something unique to say young people's attitude. There is a newly published comment essay on context by China sociologist Ying Yima. So she has a very interesting argument about, you know, we just see a lot of those self-contradiction in many aspects of the social life that we study about China.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Like, what does this self-contradiction mean to us? Shall we look for some presumed coherence here, or shall we compare this self-contradiction with some presumed coherence in other contexts? Or shall we just try to understand the inherent, maybe because China is such a big country with so many heterogeneous, you know, phenomena. So yeah, so I wonder if you could comment on that as well. I found this very fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, big questions. Let me start with the first one. Is diffusion one way? Yeah. I mean, history of meritocracy, I don't know enough to be able to tell you, for example, whether the models of Chinese bureaucratic system, where meritocracy was very much part of this whole exam system, or that, whether that's diffused. I'm sure it diffused in East Asia, for example. Yeah, but I don't know enough to be able to say how that diffused. But the kind of diffusion I'm talking about right now is, and I want to emphasize this, that China is at the center of this whole university business, right? I mean, China is actually very much contributing to this expectation of universities. Well, in their case, they also want to be very locally connected, Chinese ways of doing university and all that. But they are the ones who introduced these international rankings to start with, right? Because they wanted to make sure that there is a whole sphere, global sphere, where everyone is competing within that. But that competition, of course, creates the kind of standardizations that we are talking about, right? So, so I don't want to talk about Central, because in this case, it's very clear to me that understanding the current concepts of university, particularly in terms of what success is. I mean, that they very much contributed by creating the first international ranking system, for example, because that's then created a whole movement within other kind of countries that also introduced these at the national level. The rankings were always part of the US system. There were some in Europe, but it has literally become a field, thanks to Chinese. Yeah. So I mean, the diffusion in that sense, I wouldn't say this way or that way, but if you go back to this kind of agentic meritocratic, very individual based, I would still say that that's come from these international organizations, which were a product of the post-war international order, so they have some connection to in that sense, the whole US domination of things and all that. If you want to put it in that very simplistic terms. But one has to study. If you want to really understand diffusion, you have to do other kind of modeling, and it has to be a longitudinal data, which we don't have, so that it's difficult to make a. All I can say is that looking at cross-nationally and cross-ranked universities, that things are all very similar to each other somehow. Yeah. So I'm not making a claim in terms of, but there are other studies that talk about diffusion, including my own, but where how these things diffuse, but not in this particular case. So self-contradiction. Yeah. I mean, I do think that individuals in general, whether they're Chinese or not, have capacity to live with self-contradictions. And I think this is a very interesting kind of, they do. I mean, how else can we look at ourselves and be happy with ourselves? Really not possible. But it is a very interesting kind of sort of avenue of research, and sociologists of, I mean, they're here, for example, cognitive sociology, emotions, sociology of emotions. There are all these kind of things that one studies, but I am not able to give you an answer on that. But I wouldn't look for coherency. I would look for coherency in patterns, not individuals, but aggregate patterns. Then I can talk about what might be happening. But individuals, I wouldn't. And I don't see in that sense the aggregate patterns necessarily, all the combination of this individual answers coming up. Yeah, that's not what happened. Yeah, that's what I want to say. But that's, I think for me, it's important that we are extremely capable as individuals to live with very inconsistent kind of existence.
Um, Aaron is next on the stack.
Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. I have two quick questions, or maybe you'll answer them quickly or not. The first one is about, maybe I missed it, but how did you actually measure agentic self-perception? It strikes me as something that's actually very hard to measure. And I wonder, like, how much it's been validated as being its own, like, orthogonal or or what it's correlated with, or how much it is independent of deeper psychological or personality traits. Like if you were to measure big five or like other scales, how much is like how much is a agentic thing actually like is it really something separable? And do you view it as something that people form? When do people form this in terms of their life course? Is this something formed early on in life course or kind of later in life course, I guess, if you're doing it with university students, then it's assumed that their parents are transmitting it to them or something. And then this second question, the talk just reminded me of this famous paper in political science that shows that Chinese respondents just use scales very differently than many Western European respondents. That is, they perceive each level on a scale differently than the equivalent European would. So a 5 for a Chinese person is maybe a 3 for a European. And I wonder, it strikes me that on some of these scales, that the Chinese just might have very different conceptions of what a 5 on meritocracy is compared to what a 5 for a European might be. And so I wonder if you had done anything like in terms of differential item function or any validation that people understood these scales in similar ways possible.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we, of course, cognitive piloting of questions we did. We wanted to understand how people respond to each question. The questions for the agentic individuality, this is very standard in social values survey kind of questions where people are asked about to what scale you see yourself like this person who values autonomy, who values this and that, and success and all that. I mean, that's very standard kind of questions. So I don't think that what we are measuring in the survey is individuality traits as such. Partly because of the very large convergence of these. We should otherwise find much more, but that's not the issue. I think, if they see themselves as self-capable, I know in no world that I would assume that they are very self-capable people. I just assume that they are really think that being self-capable is what is valued, and that's how I see myself, right? So independent of whether I do these things, that's not how I see it. I mean, these are self-projections, and I come from a institutionalist kind of perspective. I see the world very much constructed by the kind of broader cultural frameworks that we live in. So if you can ask me whether I can prove that or not, of course, yeah, we can do studies and see if there are individual, these two different sets of measures make a difference or not. Yeah, we can. But the questions were very much validated even before for individuality. In terms of the yes, so yeah, we worked with some survey specialists, also focusing especially on East Asia. The main thing is that we were told in East Asia, people don't go to extremes. They always answer in the middle. But that was not the case in our, I mean, we just didn't find that. But this was a concern. So we did look at different kind of questions, different kind of answers, and try to understand whether there's a bias of that sort. This we didn't find. And we did some cognitive interviewing before we launched the questionnaire. But I mean, if you ask me in the survey, I don't know, survey specialists should say, how do we know that everyone understands the question the same way? You just have to believe in some randomness of things. You just have, you're doing 2,000 people, oh, something should cancel each other. That's how I could answer, yeah.
I don't know your name, but you're next.
Well, it's kind of I'd say a follow-up to some points raised by Mr. Bastien. I was wondering, do you believe that maybe there was like a lot of priming in regard of like answering the survey? I feel like there's some priming of like, I see university as this is the mission of university, therefore this is well, like, I'm gonna answer this, but also I'm more of like individual bias as well. And maybe the other thing I was wondering, there were some questions about the GPA previously. I was wondering, were you able to see like different, let's say, programs or like type of studies? Do you get some different results? Because I remember you mentioned previously, there was a comparison between liberal and non-liberal. So in that matter, I feel like in the type of studies that could be raised.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the interesting thing, those of us who study international students' mobility, which is a side thing for me. I mean, I'm not interested in that, but I learned, of course, turns out that Chinese students are enrolled in only certain programs when they go abroad, right? Business is one. In the UK, at least, I mean, it's large. Then, of course, sciences and all that, right? But in China, our sample looks all across. So to deal with that, we looked at comparisons of exact subjects, students in exact subjects, whether that made a difference or not. We didn't find that. So that because we asked, of course, which subject, and you might expect in maybe social science or maybe in engineering, they are much more this kind of, they think of themselves capable or not, but we didn't find that. What was that? There was another.
It was really related to the priming.
Priming. So that,
people
okay.
priming
So
is.
you call it priming, and I say that that's the institutional effect, meaning that is what I believe and I preach as my sociology. These are constructed structures. If I am in this building, the moment I enter in that big, and that happens in Tsinghua as well. Tsinghua is a huge kind of gate you enter. You know where you are. Is that a bias? No, I mean, I know I'm a university professor. Some of you know that you're students. And you know what's expected of you. Of course, that's what I'm talking about. But as I said before, are these people really, if they think that your hard work is this, or if they think that, this is how I have this, I can change the world. I can change the course of my life course, for example. Do they do that? Do they manage? Probably not. Unless you have very, strong kind of that backgrounds that lead to success in life. No, I mean, some of us study that, but my interest is not in that. My interest is how do we self-understand, and project ourselves independent of our behavioral outcomes. Of course, then I also look at whether this kind of belief leads to certain kind of behavioral outcomes as well. But that's another project at the moment. But that's how I think of it. So you think of bias, I say it's the institution. Yeah.
Andre.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I have questions about the role of exams.
Yeah.
Are they similar? The assumption is that they're more important in Asia in general, not probably in China. And whether you think that this affects your findings?
So, again, an important question because we face this question all the time. When we were doing the research and all that, and we found, I mean, in terms of the mental distress, happiness, or whatever kind of scale, we found that Chinese in Europe actually adapt to Europeans level, much less in terms of mental distress, but compared to those in China, they are more distressed. And yeah, I mean, as it happens, in European countries, there's a lot of stress in universities, and we do also know that we should be stressing those kind of environments. But there was another explanation by our Chinese colleagues, and they said that, look, in China, stress happens before you enter the university, because that exam, national exam, really, once you pass that and you're in university, you don't get the stress. But the stress happens beforehand. That's why I don't want to make big claims about the stress outcome. But yeah. So,
If I may, if I succeeded in tough exams,
yes,
I would believe I am talented. I would believe in,
sure. But it turns out that they also very strongly believe that their luck helped and their social connections helped. That's what we found.
You're good, Andre? Yeah, and Jordan was next.
Yeah, the two questions. One, just to clarify, was the British and the German samples, are those British and German natives, or are they mixed populations?
Yeah. Citizens, not natives. I mean, citizens at the moment of the survey, they are citizens, but maybe they had migrant background. We didn't count that. Yeah.
And then the other piece was, I mean, I think comparisons are super interesting in and of themselves, but kind of zooming out, I was wondering if you could like reflect a little bit on like why this is important and how these differences fit into the broader picture.
So again, for me, the kind of work I do goes back to the four very macro levels. So I think about how much the liberal world order as it has shaped different kind of. I mean, again, I come from a institutional, neo-institutionalist kind of perspective, and my interest is understanding to what extent this global liberal framework penetrated. Where do we see it? Where we don't see it? So my writing of this is a bit different than what I presented, but I also, as we are doing this, we also engage with the very strong kind of literatures in this field that's about meritocracy, right? And it was important for me, for example, to see that, maybe meritocracy is something problematic, but do we know what we are talking about empirically? I mean, is this something that, why is it that it's problematic in the case of Europe and not in other places? And that's important for me. And that's the kind of conclusions that
I have, I don't know your name, but you're next.
Okay, so thanks for the talk. My question is kind of following up on a few other comments earlier. I understand choosing college students to study it's the design your product. And I can totally imagine that when they have to be the top 1% or even 25% to go to college, they probably believe their efforts paid off. But I wonder what happens after they leave school, leave college. I'm asking because there is a widespread culture of, they call it lie flat pumping or let it rot by that, basically refusing to try hard because they realize it's meaningless, there's no future. So maybe this college life is just a rosy period of their life.
That's very important.
You have any comments on that transition?
Yeah, I think that was your question as well. I think no, and it's more or less because it's true in the universe. I mean, if your GPA is this low or that, I mean, and you're still disappointed, of course, if you didn't get to Harvard as opposed to, I don't know, some state university or something. I mean, I don't know. Maybe for some people it's a big disappointment, but the big disappointment in life comes later on, of course. I mean, yeah. So in that sense. You're right. I mean, we cannot really talk about how much this disappointment would lead to. But the argument is not only because whether I fail and that makes me suicidal or whatever. I mean, or that mental distress. So that's one. But the argument is that it's really that this idea of meritocracy puts us in a constant race, because I am actually racing against myself. The only thing I'm raising is myself, not others. Because if I am the one who work and accomplish, it can only be me, and that's should be detrimental. But I think that, as you know, with mental health or distress and all that, there are so many other factors that we have to look at, right? I mean, people from legitimization of mental health to availability, or so many different things. So I don't want to make. We have another paper about, which has nothing to do with this, but in the global sociology unit that I'm leading on the diffusion of ADHD. Right, I mean, and it's very much linked with some of these ideas and this kind of really focusing on the individual and all that. So we can look at that as well. But I do think that yes, if you want to really understand the kind of failures and its impact, you have this is not the level. You're right.
I think I jumped over Ben before. Is that possible? Sorry. And then Titre is on the side. Yeah.
I don't want to ask questions.
No,
Okay. Hi, thank you for the talk. So a couple of things. I'm asking this question from a position of almost perfect ignorance, almost perfect.
Okay.
And it's an issue that people have circled around, so I apologize if it's a little repetitive, but I was really struck by this finding that the Chinese respondents were scoring highly, basically attributing success to hard work, to luck, and to social connections. And so I was thinking about it, I mean, could this have to do with the relative scarcity of higher education in China relative to Europe or to UK and Germany? So, and this is where my almost perfect ignorance comes in. My sense is that if you want to get into higher education in the UK or Germany, you will get in somewhere. It's a relatively high proportion of those who want to go to college, university. And my sense in China is that it's a relatively scarce. Okay, so maybe this is actually a very accurate perception from the Chinese respondents that, I've gone to university, that's my measure of success. To do that, I had to work hard, I had to be lucky, and I had to have the right connections. So is that a possible explanation?
Interesting hypothesis, I think. But I mean, first of all, the enrollments really increased in China, by the way. I mean, so in terms of their enrollments, this relative difference is not huge in that sense to make the distinction. I think I think it's the system. I mean, Chinese do see that social networks really matter because of if you're connected to the party,
Right, I mean,
makes things very different in your life, right?
But then it might be true in China in a way that it's not true.
Yeah,
to the
that
same degree in Europe.
no, the party is not in Europe for sure. But is it the case? I don't know. I mean, it's not a your face kind of thing, but is it true that, I mean, I don't know, those, the Bourdieu should come and explain these things to us that, of course, all kind of connections make a big difference, no? Systemic failures. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the whole sociology is about this, isn't it? That the reason why some of us don't make it to the top is to do with socioeconomic backgrounds, social capital, cultural capital. I mean, this is the broad, the biggest kind of literature that we're churning around in sociology today to explain. Yeah,
I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends are
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. But I'm just trying to understand. Yeah, no, it's more open there. You mean, right? But the question is, why is that? We don't see it. Why is that? No, why is that? This has been studied. I mean, why is that we don't see it? Because is it the case that we work hard and that's why we end up in these places?
But I'm saying, I mean, yeah, if we think about the relative scarcity, right? If the measure of success of what these students, if what the respondents are thinking of is, what does it mean for me to have succeeded? I think the basic metric of that is I got in to higher education, I've got into university.
Yeah.
If everyone or almost everyone who gets in, then seems much easier to attribute that to more than to having a connection. Whereas it's relatively scarce, and it's therefore more difficult, than social connection make people important. So I'm wondering if this is
I'm actually not quite sure that scarcity or party connections work that. I mean, these are national exams. So what would work, for example, is that maybe you get other kind of resources. Again, it goes back to Bourdieu. You have cultural capital, you have social capital. But why is it that, I mean, do we think that in Europe yeah, it does affect, of course, I mean, I don't know, all I read in sociology at the moment is continuing inequalities that actually even education did not make any difference for us, right? I mean, I don't believe it that much myself. I mean, I do think that things have changed, but I'm not quite sure that I don't know how to also address that in a study. Is it the scarcity that might lead to? I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
One way to look at it might be to study the US as well.
Sure.
Because we do have maybe more scarcity of university.
Is that true?
Relative to Europe.
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure that, no, I don't think so. Compared to UK,
Germany, I think
yeah, I mean, I'm talking, not scarcity, I'm talking about enrollments, right?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, I mean, scarcity, no, it's out, yeah. But I don't think that's, yeah. But I'm not sure, yeah.
I'm gonna give Michelle the last question. I think we're out of time, unless there's any other.
I'm not sure. I was actually just curious whether you, I enjoyed the talk very much, whether you asked explicitly about alternative models to meritocracy. Because I think that would be really interesting, whether the alternatives are differently distributed across these different cultural contexts. And I mean, asking about networks and so on is a little bit of an alternative, but I think you need to really juxtapose the meritocratic model against some other model. So if you didn't do that, okay, fine. But I would be interested in that, and also about your solidarity research, which find very interesting because some of us are working on similar things. So there is maybe a way to ask these questions in a very comparative sense, where you can all choose your own context as well. In a crisis situation that is less dependent on economic resources, but it's like a natural disaster, or some sort of, I don't know, there's a fire, you need firefighters help or whatever, so that whether you would choose your own context over others. I think that is not exactly tackled yet with the design that you have. And so the findings there could be maybe improved. I was wondering whether you are working on something that would allow for a true solidaristic model.
So I mean, climate change, as climate risk and climate change, we are just looking at it now in the context of Philippines. That's one place we are doing survey, but not like, a very specific kind of event. And so we show maps of very high climate risk in certain regions on that, and we ask where they do their, where they donate, for example. Right, that's the question. But they do see a map. Some of them don't. Some of them see a map where it's very high risk in certain kind of areas. Do they donate across or only to their own country? So that's one question. But it doesn't directly get to what you're suggesting. But that's one question. And the other one. So, yeah, I would like to know what is the alternative model to meritocracy?
Yeah, is there a good other model? I mean.
I don't think
yeah.
so myself. Well, you ask me because I do think that, of course, meritocracy played a huge role in making sure that we are in a much more democratic, egalitarian kind of environment.
Yeah.
I do, I mean, because meritocracy, the way that I think is to do with educational expansion, right? And this ideology of education resolving everything and you know, this world level I'm talking about. So that's why we believe in meritocracy in many ways. It's very much linked with the educational expansion meritocracy. But if you ask me what is the alternative? There is an alternative, of course. I wouldn't make this kind of extreme emphasis as it is in the current context on work hard and you can succeed. Let's check on my iPhone how much I ran today. Let's check in my this and that how much I worked today. Of course, you can do away with these things. Of course, there are alternatives of that. But if you ask me, do you want to live in a non-meritocratic society? I don't myself. I don't want to. But I understand that meritocracy in terms of everyone has equal opportunity, right? And that was, in many ways, what educational expansion as an ideology put on the agenda. Did it work? Yeah, we can question. Other kind of things, of course, interfered with it. But that was, I mean, this whole idea. I mean, if you go to T.H. Marshall, this is the basis of
No,
it.
I agree with you, but
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to measure the alternatives also to what extent people could agree to them.
That's true, but what is
in
the
order to
alternative? What
know
could we say?
whether-
Yeah,
yeah.
what could we, yeah, what is the model we can ask? Yeah, I mean, we ask partly for whether you believe in luck and all that, but you cannot ask, or I, you know, do you believe in a society where race and ethnicity should matter in look, but there is something else, of course. So meritocracy, this idea that you know it just links with hyper individualism. I don't believe in that because we had, they're now being dismantled, but we had many policy contexts where meritocratic frameworks worked very well with other kind of collective targets, right? So why not? I mean, but that's under threat right now, of course. That's the point, right? And there has been this kind of push towards much more, individual and not, let's not think about the other categories. So I mean, I think in my mind it's clear, but whether you know people think in those terms, that. I think Alison, you were
I was
going
just
say
gonna jump
something.
in there. I think the causes are structural. In the deservingness welfare literature, that's usually the alternative.
That's exactly.
That I don't get ahead, not because it's my own fault, but because the system.
Yeah, I mean that so the sociology has quite strong kind of explanations, you know, why we are here, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, this deservedness. Although I have colleagues, philosopher colleagues, who believe that no, you cannot get out of this. This meritocracy in itself. There's no way around. You know, once you create this idea that it's you and your hard work and all that, you cannot get out of it. I really think that, I mean, we can create policies to deal with these things. No, I just don't give up on that. So that's it.
All right, well,
Okay.
thanks again for. On that note, we thank you and we have a